Hello and welcome to the Crux of MedTech. We go beyond the buzzwords, bringing you the insights from the innovators, investors, and leaders who are driving this life-saving space forward. Because I'm absolutely fascinated by the stories that people have to tell in MedTech. As someone who works in this sector on a daily basis, I come across so many interesting people and so many interesting stories that I think the world deserves to know about. Welcome to the Crux of MedTech.
Hello, Olivier, and welcome to the Crux of MedTech podcast.
Well, hi, Henry. Thanks for the invitation. Pleasure to be here with you.
I'm super excited to record this because, as you know, I know a couple of the team members that came across and joined you at SamanTree. So I think before we dive into all about the company, it'd be great to get a bit of background on who Olivier is and what it is that you do.
Yep. Thank you, Henry. So Olivier, actually born in the US, European parents, undergrad in Europe, worked a few years outside of life sciences prior to an MBA in the US at the University of Chicago. And after the MBA, I started in medical devices. So 25 years ago now, first job with guidance in the cardiovascular space. And my first job was actually that of a sales rep selling stents in the peripheral space. I loved it. Though after 8 months, Guidant management told me, you do great, but we didn't hire you to be a sales rep. So come over to marketing. And after, I'd say 6 or 7 years with Guidance, then I moved into smaller companies, venture and private equity backed companies. And now since 17 years, I have been in smaller venture companies. Again, typically venture funded, or private equity funded. A couple of them in cardiovascular. One of them is in interventional pulmonology. And now since 20 months, CEO of SamanTree Medical, which we'll talk about in a second. And I also have a foot in the venture side, on the investment side, being a venture partner for a US fund called Sprig Equity, which is a $50 million fund investing in medical devices and health tech, all about disruptive technologies in our spaces.
Okay, cool. And there's some really cool things to unpack there. So excited to get into the venture side as well as down into SamanTree, of course. But first, I wanted to see, what was it that really got you interested in the medical technology space? What was the point and why did you seek out this as a career trajectory?
Yeah, so two main things. One is really the impact that technologies have on patients. And two, at the time of the decision, which goes back to 2001 to 2002, was really the prospect of the combination of technology and life sciences healthcare. So that's where I went into medtech and loved it. Since then, would not want to get out of it.
Do you remember the point where you decided that you wanted to chase it? Was there something or like a key moment where you were like, yeah, this is really what I want to dive into?
Since day one, I'd say since I started with Guidance, big company first, then smaller companies, never wanted to leave. I've been approached by other sectors, but over time really got to like medical device, know medical device and specialize in it. So did not consider getting out of it.
Okay, cool. And so with the venture side, how did you get involved with venture? How did you, start your venture career and how did you dive into it?
Well, actually, was approached by longtime friends who date back to the Guidance and Abbott days. And a friend of mine called Evan Norton, who was the head of Abbott Ventures for about 10 years. A couple of years ago said, I'm probably going to start a fund. Would you be interested, to co-work with me, work part-time, a little bit on the side? And, this is someone I like. He works also with other people, including Katie Arnolds, who I know for many years and like as well, and said, this is very synergistic with the role of CEO. And I often say, because as CEO, investors tell you no very often, 95+% of the time, for a variety of reasons. And so I accepted to join Evan and Katie along the venture of the Sprig Equity Fund, on a very small part-time basis. This is a side activity, but very synergistic to the role of CEO of SamanTree and very complementary.
Of course, of course. And how does it complement? So, obviously the venture world is the other side of the table to the operator side of the world. So, how does that help you with progressing SamanTree further, and what perspectives does it give you as you're developing the company?
Yeah, it gives me the perspective of how funds think, strategize, and decide. Because often as a CEO, you get a no for, and you're like, not sure if the reason or if there is a reason. So that's one. Two, funds are very strategic in decision making, in landscape analysis. And that's very interesting because it's all about trends in medical devices, whether it's about trends of investments from corporates, from strategics, trends of the markets, investment markets and public markets. And having that side is very complementary to being CEO of SamanTree or, any other company.
Okay. So just to kind of give a bit of advice to the audience, given that you're in the venture side of things, like how do startup and scale up CEOs make themselves attractive to investment in the current markets with the challenges that have been going on and everything that's going on in America to make things more challenging for some people? How can startups make themselves attractive to the venture world at the moment?
Yeah. So obviously it's all about the fundamentals of the product, the market and product and clinical data and the team. So it has been difficult for a few years to raise funds. It's certainly more difficult or very difficult for prior to commercialization stage assets or, products/companies. Certainly easier on the growth financing, growth capital stage. So for prior to commercialization stage companies, it's really about, getting your ducks in a row. And it's more difficult than it was a couple of years ago. So it's combination of product, value prop, who benefits, patients, providers, payers. They all need to benefit, who benefits, and how is the investor going to make money in the end? They are about impact and money. But in the end, most investors are about what their return is going to be in their vertical, which, in our case is usually medtech.
Okay, awesome. And so let's start to dive into what we're here to talk about, which is SamanTree. So what is SamanTree and what does SamanTree do?
Yep. So SamanTree is a Swiss-Belgian company and now moving really over to the US that has developed a unique imaging technology called Histolog Scanner. And what the Histolog Scanner does is it's a mobile scanner that can be placed in the operating room and a pathology lab. And the scanner generates very quickly, in a minute, a high resolution image of a specimen, typically a breast tumor, for example, or a prostate. So it provides an image of a margin, 1 minute, high resolution, with a workflow which is fast and easy and does not destroy the specimen, because typically the specimen will go to histology or pathology after surgery. So it's a device used typically in surgery for imaging of the microstructures of tissue, typically fresh tissue.
Amazing. And for people who don't really know how this is done traditionally and the impacts that it causes, just talk me through how histology is done at the moment.
Yeah.
Without the Histolog scanner, of course.
So today what happens when a woman goes through breast cancer surgery, for example, or someone goes through a prostate surgery is that he or she has to wait anywhere from 3 days to 3 weeks for pathology to come back and say there was cancer on the outside of the specimen, which actually means there is still cancer inside. Because if there is cancer on the outside of the specimen, it means there was cancer remaining inside. And so that's what's happening today. There is one way the pathologists can do what's called intraoperative margin assessment, and that is called frozen section analysis. So that is a process. It's not a product. It's a process which is done by the pathologist during a surgery. And during the surgery, they will take the specimen, for example, a prostate, they will express freeze it, which takes 15 minutes or so. They will then slice the specimen and look with the microscope at the slices to see if on the outside of the specimen there is what they want to see or not see, i.e. typically cancer or not. And so frozen section is done by the pathologist, can be done during a surgery, but it will take anywhere from 20 minutes to more than an hour. And surgeons do not like to wait. And pathologists do not like to be pressed, to have the surgeons wait for an answer and ask them, hurry up. I would like to know, what do you see from the specimen? But that is the process that allows today to do intraoperative margin assessment, which can then lead to the surgeons deciding to cut further or not. I will add, if I may, one logistical aspect of the complexity of this frozen section analysis process is that the specimen needs to be transported to the pathology lab. And not all hospitals with surgery rooms have a pathology lab next door. For example, one of our important sites and investigators is in London, Dr. Brett Shaw. He was telling me that the specimen in their institution is transported by bike from one building where they do the surgery to another building, which is half a mile away, where the pathology is done. So you referred to people like, I know someone like John Britnell, who when we hired was like, oh, that does not happen in the US. But guess what? Even in New York, in a very large tier 1 academic center, we know that when they need a frozen section, it happens that the specimen goes from one tower to the next tower. And that does not take 2 minutes in New York City. So it's highly inefficient.
Absolutely. And so if in those kinds of cases then, like, is the patient still under for that whole piece? And if it comes back that there is still cancer within the margin, then the surgeon has to go back in and finish the job. So increasing the time of surgery enormously at the moment.
That is correct. The patients are asleep during a frozen section analysis, which is also one reason for which it is done by surgeons and institutions that have enough resources and really dedicate the time. But it takes so much time. It's a difficult trade-off for institutions in an era where most hospitals, most groups have a shortage of pathologists who are typically the ones who are reviewing the images and certainly the ones who drive this process of frozen section analysis.
Okay, so when a surgeon who is going through a process like the two you've just mentioned and the cases you just mentioned, what's their reaction when they get the Histolog scanner in their hands? How do they react? And let's see.
So it's funny you ask, because we're having incredible reactions. Some of the ones we got are like, I have been waiting for this we've heard 10, we've heard 15 years. So I have been waiting for this for 10 plus years is one. Two is, we need this. And this is going to make me a better doctor. Because most physicians know that whether it's in breast or prostate, there is a very high percentage of positive margins, which means specimens that are extracted and there is cancer remaining in the patient, but they are blind. And a lot of robotic surgeons tell us we have no way and we do not have resources to perform frozen section or NeuroSafe. NeuroSafe is the frozen section technique specific to prostate. So like, wow. And you can do this so easily and fast. Again, one image is 1 minute. And so if they want to do a few images, it will take 3 to 5 minutes to do the images and then another couple of minutes to assess. So it can take 10 minutes all in.
Absolutely. And then frozen section, if you can't do frozen section, what happens in those procedures?
Nothing. I.e., as the surgeons tell us, we are blind. So certainly in prostate, there is no other way, really. In breast cancer, there have been a number of companies. There are actually other companies providing technologies to do so-called margin assessment. None that has what I would say the technical combination and technological differentiation that the Histolog scanner provides of speed, resolution, field of view. We can image fairly large specimens with an easy workflow, but there are other technologies. Yet it is, some have failed because of, lack of adoption. Some are launching and starting as we speak. In prostate, certainly there hasn't been really technologies to replace frozen section.
Interesting. And then obviously if the cancer hasn't been got, then that causes readmissions, further surgeries and difficulty for the patients.
Yes, and that is use case, that is indication specific. For example, in the case of breast surgery, the female patients can come back, so the surgeons can technically re-intervene. And it's actually terrible to know that 20 to 30% of female who are getting a first intervention have to come back for a second one. And that's technically possible because the landmarks allow the surgeons to know where to re-intervene. If we talk about urology and soft tissue and prostate, for example, in the case of prostate, you cannot re-intervene because a week later, a surgeon that would go back in would not know. I mean, the soft tissue re-agglomerates and there is no way to go back in 24 hours after you cannot. So it's really during the index procedure that a surgeon can re-intervene. And in the case of prostate, it's really about trying to save the nerves to preserve or improve erectile function. That has to be done during the index procedure, the first surgery.
Okay. Excellent. And then what's the clinical data that you've collected so far and what's the claims or the data to back up the claims?
Yes. So in breast cancer surgery, the claim is that we have shown clinical results that allow or show the potential to reduce reinterventions by 2/3 up to 75%. So reduce the reinterventions from 30 to 10%. That's been shown in a recent study presented in the US. So that's a major reduction of the reinterventions. That's very material for patients, for payers, and even for providers. Breast surgeons tell us the worst for us is calling the patient back saying, we did not get it all out and you have to come back. So that's really in breast. In prostate, the published clinical data shows similar accuracy to frozen section analysis, but in 8 minutes versus 50 minutes. And that is major. So right now that is published. It's similar accuracy to frozen, but in so much less time. And it is not histolog specific clinical data, but in the field of prostate, there is important clinical data that just came out a few weeks ago at the EAU, the European Association of Urology. There was a large randomized study ran in the UK by the PI, Professor Greg Shaw, multicentric, more than 400 patients that have been randomized in prostatectomies to frozen section done with NeuroSafe to no NeuroSafe. And what the study has shown is that at 1 year, the patients that got NeuroSafe had, a significantly preserved and improved erectile function. So the conclusion was, and the paper was published in Lancet Oncology simultaneously with the presentation, that was in March. The conclusion was intraoperative margin assessments in robot-assisted prostatectomies should be done as it improves erectile function at 1 year. So better functional outcomes. So margin assessment for prostatectomies should be done. Yet Dr. Shaw, who is also a histolog user, is also the one saying it's difficult to do frozen. It's not pragmatic. It's not practical. We don't have resources. It actually costs a lot. And it's not great for the patient who stays asleep an hour. Histolog can do it so much faster.
Absolutely. And even with planning for surgical procedures from an anesthetic point of view, from a staff planning point of view, if you can shorten those times, you can get more volume of patients and cases through in a day. There's big advantages to the health system, to the patient who's on the table for less time, and then also to the surgeons in terms of cognitive load and getting more cases done in a day. So it is very compelling, the technology and the use cases.
I'm interrupting this episode to bring you a word from our sponsors, TTP. TTP is a leader in complex medical technology development with deep scientific and engineering expertise. They support ambitious medtech companies in solving high-risk, high-complexity challenges where there's no margin for error. Whether you're tackling uncharted technical territory or racing to bring a product to market, TTP provide clarity and direction. By de-risking innovation and ensuring seamless alignment with regulatory and manufacturing demands, TTP help you move forward with speed and confidence. To find out more, check out the show notes.
You've obviously selected two kind of beachhead procedures as breast and prostate. What went into the decision making behind those two versus some of the other areas where the Histolog scanner can be used in the future?
Yeah. So as always in small companies, it's about focus. Got to pick your battles. And it's funny, when I started, I have seen the versatility, the potential of the technology, which is really very broad because, it can image any kind of tissue. It can image surgery tissue. It can image biopsies, can image any tissue. And we have some experience in a number of other use cases such as ENT. There's a lot of interest in lung. There are a number of urology indications coming up, but from breast, the next indication was really prostate. And both of those are significant unmet needs by the percentage of reinterventions in breast, by the percentage of positive margins in prostate. Typically 30%, of patients go back home with still positive margins, meaning cancer inside. And, we had progressed even before my time on clinical studies, clinical partnerships with investigators in these two indications that are both significant unmet needs, so that as a company, we say, those are going to be our beachheads. We start there. For other indications, some are coming from the real world usage, and we have a number of physicians telling us, I would like to use the histolog in this indication, this indication, this indication, and we are then partnering with them, yet we just don't have resources to do sponsored prospective clinical studies in every one of those, in 6 months. So it's a matter of timing and deciding. And so we went really from breast to prostate. And then from prostate, it's the robotic surgeons and the urologists that have expanded. And for example, we now have public data that has been presented, feasibility data in bladder for TURBT, which is also a 30% redo procedure. So 30% of patients have to come back. Penile cancer, which is a low volume indication, but very important one where frozen section or margin assessment is important. Cystectomies. And then outside of urology, there is also a usage going on in others like ENT, and incredible interest in lung, where we are currently assessing how to move forward.
Okay, awesome. And I know that you joined the company as CEO after it was founded and after the company was founded. So what was the founding story behind SamanTree? How did it all come about? And who was the original propagators of this technology?
Yeah, well, a great story. Basically, 3 brilliant engineers, PhDs, 1 Canadian, 2 Swiss, who were working at the EPFL, which is the, Lausanne, Switzerland University, world famous for engineering. And they were working on confocal microscopy and on accelerating and miniaturizing confocal microscopy, which is really what they did with the goal. They had identified that there was a need in the medical space and in, the surgical space, the diagnostic space for a fast, high resolution technology that allows for, with an easy workflow, for a intraoperative decision making. And so it's really 2014 is when the company was incepted, spun off of the Lausanne, EPFL University. And then the three co-founders really started. And today we still have one of them who is the CTO and a couple of the engineers who started with them at the time who now have a longer than 10-year tenure. And, that was part of the attractiveness for me as well, besides the technology and its potential is, of course, the brilliant engineering team that is behind the technology.
Okay, excellent. And I think you were telling me at the start about there was a surgeon story prior to us starting to record this. There was a surgeon story about people coming and asking and requesting this technology. Do you mind just going over that again? Because I thought it was quite an impactful story you had there.
Yeah. So one story is indeed how did the company go from breast to other indications and specifically prostate? And so it was before my time, but in 2019, a Dutch group of physicians from a well-known hospital, Dr. Sumford, who is a robotic surgeon, together with his pathologist, Dr. Vreuls, they basically taped themselves with a couple of slides. They did a 9-minute video that they sent to SamanTree to pitch the concept of the Histolog Scanner in prostate, and saying, if you let us do a feasibility study, we believe we can show that the Histolog Scanner can do so much faster margin assessment in prostatectomies because they were already at the time performing frozen section. And so the anecdote is fun that they basically sent a video as a pitch to SamanTree. And I literally a week ago, going back to the history, the team showed me the video. So yeah, that's the history of going from breast to urology in this Dutch group.
Very good. And that same Dutch group are now users of the Histolog scanner, if I remember correctly.
Yes, absolutely. And they're the ones who published the first paper on prostate. Yeah.
Cool. I love that. That's a full circle moment of pitching it in there, giving an idea, and then actually getting it into the use in the hands. And they must be super excited to have the technology after they saw and had the vision for prostatectomy.
They had seen, this group together with soon after the groups from London, like Greg Shaw, they saw that frozen section was beneficial to patients, but so inefficient and difficult to perform. And they had, as we say now, seen the light that Histolog was going to be able to do at least the same, yet so much faster. And so for them now, it's like with the NeuroSafe proof clinical data that I was referring to that has been published in Lancet Oncology showing erectile function improvements, they're like, now we've proven, and this is actually the first randomized study showing that in prostatectomies, we can improve erectile function. We can do nerve sparing prostatectomies if we do proper margin assessment. Then the question is, which margin assessment? Do you do it with frozen section or you use a technology like the Histolog scanner?
Very nice. Very nice. And so to move the conversation on to where you guys are at now, you got Series B funding quite recently within the last year. You're also starting your commercialization across Europe and the US as well. How are you thinking about commercialization, and where are you trying to get the first installations of the Histolog scanner? Talk to me about how you're thinking about commercializing and what you guys have got on the high level strategy.
Yeah. So indeed, and our eyes have been gradually shifting to the US more and more in the last months after getting FDA clearance last year and hiring, John Britnell, a former Intuitive, as our head of sales in the US. And so we've been talking to a number of sites with the strategy of being direct in the US, while in Europe or international, we have a combination of direct presence in a couple of close to home markets and a couple of distributors. And actually, we've recently been fortunate to sign very well-known distributors, and a couple of them are robotic surgery experienced Intuitive distributors, for example. But in the US, we've been decided to go direct and are going direct. This is on a global base, the most important market, I think, throughout medtech, we know, by all means. And so we have a small team for now. In March and April, we've just added 2 area sales directors, and we'll add more. And we have performed the first evaluation procedures in 3 institutions in April. So, and the strategy has been a combination of academic institutions, but also we are talking to a couple of community hospitals, and both are attracted by the value proposition. Mm-hmm. The academics know that margin assessment is better. They don't all perform it all the time because it's, even for academic institutions, difficult, but they know it's better for patients. And there are a number of community hospitals that also are so interested to reduce their reintervention rate or, decrease the positive margin rate in prostatectomies. Actually, one of those is in Orange County, California. Is a group called Hoag. They are a group of innovative community hospitals, and they are the 2 physicians, Jeff Bassett and Moses Kim. When they saw this technology a month and a half ago at NARUS in Vegas, they're like, we've been waiting for this. They do frozen section for almost every prostatectomy. They say, we've been waiting for this. We need this. I visited them with our colleague in Irvine and Newport Beach in March. And so second part of April, they have done their first procedures in prostatectomies. So it's the beginning, 3 institutions in April. The other 2 are academic groups, one in New York, one in Dallas. So the well-known, large academic tier 1 institutions. And so there is interest across the spectrum, from these academic institutions and key opinion leaders to these, important physicians working in community hospitals.
Amazing stuff. And hearing about the academics. So I obviously know John from previous interactions before he came and joined you guys. And given that you're going after the academics, there couldn't really be someone who would be maybe better at building out an academic strategy than John, especially for a big piece of capital equipment, having built out Intuitive's academic accounts from basically ground zero. So I think that was a phenomenal hire given where you're going to in the US. And going on to that, you've made quite a few Intuitive hires, and Intuitive guys have been getting involved with the board and having a lot of impacts into the company. So what is it that you've seen from the surgical robotics, specifically Intuitive? Because I know that's where most of the talent and people are coming from. But what is it about Intuitive that you've kind of been attracted to and having these guys on board?
Yeah. So first of all, I highly respect Intuitive and what they have done. It's a little bit new to me. As I said, I'm coming from the cardiovascular world, so closer to Guidant, historically Boston Scientific, Abbott. And having gotten to learn, or discover the surgery space and specifically robotic surgery, I have to say I'm very impressed with what certainly Intuitive has built. And so indeed, we have hired John Britnell on our board. We have Henry Charlson, who is an independent director, and Henry is an EVP and global chief commercial officer at Intuitive. Obviously, he knows the space well. And as you said, since then, we have hired in Europe a senior salesperson, ex-Intuitive, who's managing our direct markets in the US. some of the US area directors are also former Intuitive. So what we see is the analogy to product solution. Intuitive has a piece of equipment, consumables, and software. And I think throughout the years, what they've learned, we hear this, we know this, is they've learned that it's not just about the install, it's also about utilization, what they call clinical. And this is the same for us. So we have the scanner, we have disposables that are sold that are single use, and there is software. The software is, for example, allowing for remote connection so that the surgery room can be connected directly to the pathologist, who then does not need to be in the OR. And it's not commercially released yet, but we're working on AI to accelerate, improve the reading of the images for pathologists and surgeons. And so we have equipment, we have disposables, we have software. So that's one analogy, business model wise. I think another one is that Intuitive is still a disruptive, transformational technology, and Histolog Scanner is as transformational. The robotics and the robots have made surgeons better. It helped them operate better. It elevates the precision of the surgery, and Histolog does the same. It improves surgery. It gives them decision making by providing more precision, more accuracy in the surgery. And then finally, another analogy is that I've heard a lot of stories of, for so many years, Intuitive had no reimbursement. And actually, it's enough. It's important everywhere, but I know in Europe, there have been a lot of discussions from the society saying you need to do large randomized trials. And in the end, Intuitive has, not ran large randomized trials and has been able to create an incredible ecosystem. And even from a business standpoint, real dominance. I don't know what will be our strategy. This is work in process and it evolves a lot with our key opinion leader base. So I'm not saying we will or we will not run large randomized studies, but today we don't have a reimbursement which is specific to the Histolog scanner. There are some reimbursements for the pathologist acts, for intra-op consultations, but not for Histolog scanner specifically. And, but the inefficiencies of the workflow that it solves are creating the demand and generating the positive traction that we're seeing commercially on both sides of the ocean.
Okay. So you talked about AI as well as part of this technology. So how much of an impact do you think leveraging AI in pathology can have? And is this almost like the product of the future that's going to make the biggest difference, or is the Histolog scanner still going to be the kind of biggest piece of this puzzle, I guess?
It starts with the Histolog scanner. The unicity and the differentiation of the technology is really that ability to do the histology grade image very fast. But then what AI will add is it will accelerate the reading of the image for surgeons and pathologists. And so it will amplify, it will accelerate, it will help, but it starts and it will start, and it will always be the case that it starts with the image which is generated during the procedure or, in a pathology lab setting, but of fresh tissue. And then the image can be read, annotated, and the surgeon or pathologist reading can be accelerated with AI. But I think we're still quite far from AI taking over everything. The image will need to be generated, but AI will improve and accelerate the performance of reading, and over time, interpreting, and over time, maybe another step later, diagnosing or being a fully diagnostic solution, which of course will require quite some clinical validation along the way.
Of course. And so in terms of how you're going to market with Histolog, if you're able to share, are you mainly doing like you mentioned there's like a capital element and a kind of the razor blade business model. Are you also looking at like pay-per-use and other types of pricing models as well? And if so, kind of what are you looking at? What are the surgeons requesting, and how does that differ across markets from the US to Europe? And give us a bit of detail on that. It's quite fun to get into the micro data there.
Yes. So indeed, we have the equipment, the consumables, and then service and maintenance and software. So the base traditional model is you sell the equipment, then we sell the consumables, and we have service and maintenance, on annual basis, plus software, which is a SaaS model. So when it's packed onto the traditional purchase model, it's an upfront fee for install, like starting the remote technology. And after the initial year, it's an annual subscription. But then to your point, pay-per-use, pay-per-click has been on the rise for a number of years and certainly in the US more than in Europe. And this is something that we are starting to discuss with some groups. So we know that a number of groups prefer like the pay-per-click model, and that is something we can entertain. As a very small company, you talked about our Series B, indeed working cap is important. So we prefer cash up front and selling the equipment. But in the end, that is about financial engineering, and we can deal with pay-per-click options. We might have also intermediary ones saying, can we get a $50,000 or $70,000 check for an initial number of procedures and then go to a pure by month or by quarter pay-per-click? So we are, we're definitely open to both. We are using both models. And the third, which is in between, is a rental or leasing of the equipment. But typically what we see in that case is that it's a bridge to acquisition. It's typically when the sites would like to, or they're still hesitating and want to check for 6 months or 12 months prior to acquiring.
Absolutely. Like a buyout is what a few of the robotics companies call it.
Another quick interruption to tell you about our sponsors, KUKA. KUKA is a global leader in robotics with over 25 years of experience partnering with medtech companies on their journey to market. Their reputation is built on robust technology, reliability, and long-term collaboration. More than a supplier, KUKA provides trusted support throughout the product lifecycle, from development to integration and beyond. For companies exploring robotic solutions, the KUKA LBR Med offers a ready-to-integrate, state-of-the-art option that meets the highest medical standards, without the need to build from scratch. If you want to find out more, then head to the show notes and follow the link to KUKA's website.
So what are you most excited about for the future of SamanTree and coming into the future?
Yeah. So, what's exciting is the traction we're seeing from physicians. It's the comments I made are like, we have people who are long-standing, experienced physicians. And actually, I'll tell a story about one. His name is Jorn Witt. He is a well-known robotic surgeon in Germany. He's done more than 10,000 prostatectomies. So 10,000 prostatectomies means he's a real robotic surgeon. I mean, he started many years ago. He's been in Gronau, Germany, and now he's in Düsseldorf. We meet him early January. It's actually Michael Hansen who knew him. And it's like, Olivier, come to me. Let's go meet Dr. Witt. And Dr. Witt tells me, my prostates go by car 20 miles away while the patient is asleep for the frozen section. Your solution is what will change my world and the patient outcomes. 3 weeks later, the deal was done. He's now using the Histolog Scanner in routine for the prostatectomies. They have remote connection installed between the surgery room in Düsseldorf and the pathology department, which is 20 plus miles away. And that is game changing. So that is exciting. Realizing how these workflow inefficiencies can be changed. And that's the power of technology, both the scanning, the imaging technology with the facilitator, which IT is, remote connection, and which, of course, tomorrow AI will be. And then it's really the pull from physicians. It's, as John, there will be others that like no one says no. Then, of course, it's equipment and there is a cycle, but some are quick to decide. Like in Düsseldorf, it was very quick, took less than a month. Some will be longer, but so many physicians want it. And that goes back to, my own personal due diligence. Prior to accepting the role, I knew some of the investors in the company, but being a bit new to surgery and imaging, I was needed to talk to physicians. And I spoke to a well-known robotic surgeon in Belgium called Alex Motry, who, I knew through the network. And I'm like, Alex, is this real? Because he had used it before I made my decision. He's like, Olivier, this is real. This is game-changing. This is transformational. And he was right. So, yeah. And that's, I'm seeing that on a daily basis and the team as well. So your question was, what's the most exciting? Well, it's the fact that has been proven day after day, month after month. And today more than ever, the pull from the market is very exciting.
Absolutely. And when I was talking to John, before he joined, he said, hey, Henry, if this actually works, then this is one of the biggest things within medtech. And so he came and joined you after he realized it is real. So it is super, super impactful. And I think there's a very cool story to come for SamanTree and just at the early stages. So definitely we'll be following all the way along this journey. So what's next? You said there's some big announcements to come from SamanTree that you'd like to share. So yeah, what's coming next from you guys that we can expect to see?
So we're going to continue to see a flow of clinical data, experience, and initial evaluations, and then commercial integrations in the US, together with partnership with tier one well-known distributors. One that I can disclose is that we have partnered with a distributor called Device Technologies for Australia, New Zealand, and Southeast Asia. Mm-hmm. And it's, we're still a small company, so it feels on one side, that's a little bit far from home, but we have gotten so much interest from a group like Device Technologies, which is the intuitive distributor and distributes a number of tier one products from MedTech that we have to work with them. And actually, it's not only them. We also signed recently the AB Medica Spanish franchise, and AB Medica is the group that, Intuitive has just announced they would buy over to go direct in Italy, Spain, and Portugal. And so AB Medica in Spain, which is called AB Salud, is distributing, or we've signed an agreement a couple of weeks ago, and is starting imminently in Spain and Portugal. Clinical data. So you will see some more data. At the AUA at the end of April, we announced some new data on bladder, TURBT. And in the next month, so in the conferences after summer, like ERUS, the European Robotic Society meeting, you will hear more about the clinical experience and about the usage, especially in prostatectomies, as well, where there are a couple of clinical programs ongoing that new clinical data will be announced for. So that's going to come, and then new people joining. The team is growing month by month. In March, we added one sales director in the US. In April, we added another sales director in the US. We are continuing to grow in the US and in Europe, because the pull is there and the interest from physicians is high. And we did close an extension to the Series B that you've referred to. That was announced, end of March. So that was led by Carista, French funds. And there will be more funding needed, obviously, for a small company like us. Debt or equity, we're discussing with a number of groups. So you will see more announcements coming out, probably towards the second part of this year.
Very exciting. Very exciting. Super, super interesting. Love everything that's going on there. So if you wanted to leave the audience with a few key messages about SamanTree, is there anything we haven't discussed today that you want the audience to know about? Is there anything you'd like to share?
So I'd probably summarize with saying, watch the transformational technology of the Histolog Scanner, just because it's so exciting. back to what we touched on a couple of times. One, two, I always say focus. And as we've said, as a company, we are focusing today, breast and prostate, yet are not negating, other indications. But focus is also about people, the right people. And I think in early commercialization, startups, scale-ups, it is critical to have the right people. You never have at this stage the luxury to have many people, and certainly not too many people. So it's even more important to choose the right people, who have done it. And I think that's, in some of our conversations, we talked about the pedigree. Having people who have done it is important. You talked about John Britnell, and you also know Michael Hansen, or, European direct market sales director. These people have done it in their past lives. They both have been with Intuitive. And it's important to have these right people, focus them, and work closely with key opinion leaders and physicians. Because I talked about, Motri, Greg Shaw, Sumford. There are people who I talk to on a regular basis. I talk to some of them even before accepting. That is key for a technology that has such a potential as the Histolog Scanner. Follow the market and work hand in hand and closely with the community of, key opinion leaders, people who know, can influence both academics and non-academics.
Okay, excellent. And so for people who want to see the Histolog Scanner, what events and expos are you going to be at over the next few months where people can come and see the technology hands-on?
Yes, so we were at AUA end of April in the US. The next meetings, certainly on the urology side, are CILR. That's early June in Rome.
Awesome. And if you could give one advice to other founders or CEOs within the medtech industry right now, what would that one piece of advice be?
The right people. The right people. I think it's, the right people will make it happen. I'm only there, I like to say, I don't want to play professor and take the credit. It's the team that does the job, and they deserve the credit. But it is about the right people. I think in very small companies, I do say there is no room for coffee drinkers, and everyone delivers. Everyone is very close to the outputs. Everyone does much more on a functional basis than what you do in a very large company. By the nature of small companies, where you've got to do a little bit of everything and nothing in an organized manner. And so that's why I say it's so important to have the right people. People who can also work and perform in small companies, because not everyone can. There are star performers of large companies that will never perform in small companies because they cannot. They're not, they're not rolling up their sleeves enough, or they need the support that large companies provide, which is fine. I think that's the little piece of hiring. And you know that very well, Henry. That's one of your jobs as well. To identify these individuals who will be able to perform and outperform in a setup where you don't have all the support.
Of course.
Yeah.
All right. Well, what a message to finish on, and absolutely a topic that I would like to think I'm a little bit of an expert on. So thank you so much for joining me today, Olivier. It's been fascinating to learn more about SamanTree, and best of luck with everything. And thank you very much for joining me today.
Thanks a lot to you, Henry, and thank you to the audience.
Thank you so much for joining me on the Crux of MedTech podcast. If you're not already doing so, please go ahead and subscribe on YouTube or follow the podcast on Spotify or wherever you get your podcasts. This podcast is proudly brought to you by Crux. Crux is a medtech search firm which places pioneers in transformative roles to help us live longer, healthier lives. We do 3 things for companies. We help hire world-class executive talent.
We help companies raise investment from Series A to Series C and execute upon M&A. And we also are building a community of medtech leaders to facilitate peer-to-peer learning and accelerate the companies to help them go faster. If you're interested in any of those three things, please reach out to me on LinkedIn or follow the link in the show notes to find out more. Thank you.